Well, thank you for being with us on the Word of Encouragement here on this Tuesday. And today I'd like to go to the last chapter of the book of 1 Thessalonians. This may be the earliest book written under inspiration in the New Testament times, or it may be the second one, but regardless, it was early, and it was written to a church that had a mighty beginning. The Thessalonican church had been used of God, and the people had grown rapidly and had spread the gospel. Chapter 1 is so thrilling when you read of what God had done. And Paul wasn't there all that long. He eventually had to leave, and we don't know exactly, anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months. But even in that amount of time, God had set the foundation for a tremendous work. But one of the things that we do read in the two epistles is that they were facing persecution. They had some real pushback. And so these new Christians were facing a real trial for their faith. And in chapter 5, verse 11, we read, "Wherefore comfort yourselves together, and edify one another, even as also ye do." Here we have a way for us to stay encouraged and to be encouraged and to be an encourager. It says that we are to comfort ourselves together. There is something about the assembly of God's people when the gifts are functioning that keep our perspective right, keeps it spiritually focused and eternally perspective that will help us instead of looking at all that's going on around us. And so as we are together, we are to comfort, and then it says to edify one another, to build one another up. When you go to Ephesians chapter 4, you find one of the purposes that the members are to have to one another is to build one another up as we serve the Lord and using our gifts, being what we ought to be. And so I have found that if God's people have the right relationship with each other and are comforting others, they themselves will be comforted. If they're trying to build others up, they themselves will then reciprocally be built up. In a marriage, when a marriage partner is endeavoring to be a blessing and to fulfill their role to their spouse, there normally is, unless there's real problems, there's normally just a cycle of blessing that comes from that. And so when we're selfless, God is able to then bless us through that, because those that we help will in turn, in a church setting, be a help to us. We need one another's giftings. We need to be around God's people. Let me just say, if you don't make the effort to really be around God's people, you're going to be discouraged. We are not to forsake the assembling of ourselves. We are to be allowing God's giftings and others to make us what we ought to be and bring us into the right relationship with God that God intends for us to have. Yes, we need to hear the preaching. That's one of the gifts that's very important. But we also need the other gifts of encouragement and helps and the teaching and all the other things that go on in a church. We need all of that. And just the fellowship one another to just be a blessing. And so as I read this, I couldn't help but think of the context here in Thessalonica. They were suffering, but they were coming together. They were ministering to one another, because he says, even as also ye do. And as I've said many times, when you help somebody else, you're the one that's most helped. When you allow God to make you selfless and you are a channel of his blessing, the wave of blessing comes back over you. And so we need to not isolate ourselves. If ever Christians needed to be with Christians and giving of themselves to other believers, it's today. And I promise you, if things get more difficult, what I'm telling you today is going to be vitally important for you to stay encouraged.